Welcome to our webinar today. My name is Adam Kokendorfer. I'm an attorney at the law firm Wolfson Bolton in Troy, Michigan. This is a shortened version of our presentation I gave at the MMA's Operations Conference. Our goal today is to give you some tips and tricks when negotiating supply contracts. How can you anticipate potential changes in the market and structure agreements so that your company is prepared for the future? So first off, a little background on me. Our firm has extensive experience representing manufacturers, and it really does run the gamut. We've represented everything from large global OEMs to mom and pop tooling shops and everything in between. And that includes many industries as well. Certainly automotive, but a lot of manufacturers in other areas too. So let's dive in here to our substance today. If you leave today with any single message when creating supply contracts, it's this. It's not enough to just negotiate a great deal. You have to keep it. As every manufacturer knows, so many things can change after you've signed a contract. Volume forecasts can be wildly off. Product programs can be longer or shorter than anticipated. Costly engineering changes can eat into your profit margins, and it goes on and on. The good news is that you can attempt to insert specific terms into your contract up front to anticipate those changes and to protect your company. And that doesn't mean that the other side will always agree to all of your proposals, but you certainly should try to put some of them on the table. So first let's talk about some of the changing conditions that you may encounter, and then the specific terms that you can use to address them. First off, volume fluctuations. So this is a big one. In many industries, it's relatively common for volume forecasts to be wrong. Nobody has a crystal ball, and market conditions can quickly change. The problem, though, is that most supply contracts have fixed prices regardless of volumes. So the actual volumes can turn out to be double the forecast. They can be half the forecast. It doesn't matter. The price remains the same. At least that's the default. Well, you can propose specific terms in your contract that address this problem. So here's an example of something you may try to use. It states, prices are fixed for volumes fluctuating within 20% of X pieces each year. You can decide whatever X is, whatever you can get the other side to agree to. In the event required volumes fall outside of this range, the parties will negotiate in good faith to reach an agreement that would allow production outside this range. So you can propose that term and see what happens. Don't forget about all the other parts of your costs that can also be affected, though, by volume fluctuations. For example, tooling. Some supply contracts may state that you're responsible for paying for all the replacement tooling. Well, that's fine if the actual volumes, are turn out to be the same as the forecasts. If the actual volumes are, say, double the forecasts, then you may have to pay for a lot more replacement tooling than you originally thought. And of course, that is going to eat into your profit margin. So try inserting a term that indicates who will pay for additional tooling costs if volumes exceed a certain threshold. What else can change? Shorter than expected program durations, that can have an impact on costs. For example, these days, the automotive industry is seeing faster vehicle refreshes than ever before. And you may think you have 8 years to recoup your capital investment and hit a certain profit target, but it may turn out to be 3 years. Don't forget, many contracts allow the customer to terminate for convenience. What does that mean? That means the customer may terminate the contract for any reason whatsoever, even no reason. So what can you do? Well, you may propose terms that the customer won't terminate for convenience for a certain period of time. Say for the first 2 or 3 years of a contract, there will be no termination for convenience. They can still terminate for breach. They can breach if somebody isn't living up to their end of the bargain, but they need a reason. You could also propose a term that could state that if the program terminates unexpectedly within a certain period of time, investment costs will be shared in accordance with a specific formula. But that's a real area of concern to pay attention to. What's another? Engineering changes. That's another area where profit margins can take a hit. Many supply contracts permit a customer to make engineering changes to goods after production has already begun, sometimes long after production has already begun. What if those changes increase the cost of production? It may not matter under the agreement. In some instances, the customer can decide whether the supplier receives any price increase, even if the costs have gone up. So what can you do? Well, here's a specific term you may try to include. If the cost of implementing any engineering change results in a cost difference equaling at least X% of the piece price, the price will increase or decrease by that same amount respectively. What else can change? A lot of other factors that can affect your margins. When you're negotiating your contract, think about all the conditions that can change in the future and affect those margins. Tariffs, that's a big one these days. We've had many clients come to us with issues like that. Currency fluctuations, raw materials, it's a long, long list. So let's say that you've listened to this webinar. You were actually able to successfully negotiate terms that protect you against some of these future changes. Now you shouldn't have to worry about any of those contract terms, right? Wrong. Even after you sign a supply agreement and receive your first purchase order, later events can change that agreement, and you may not even know it's happening. Well, what do I mean? Well, some customers will continue to issue purchase orders for the same product. This is actually very common. For example, if your agreement states that the price will change each quarter to reflect changes in metal costs, the customer may issue a new PO each quarter stating the new price. But new purchase orders equal new pitfalls. Carefully read every PO that a buyer issues, even if it's for the same part, because there may be a typo in there, or there may be an intentional change you weren't expecting. And if you continue shipping goods after you receive that PO, you may be bound by it, even if you think that your prior agreement said something different. This is an important point. Oftentimes I'll see a supplier receive a PO and they'll disagree with something. The supplier, though, will then send an email to the customer and they'll say, well, we accept your PO except for X, Y, or Z provisions. And the supplier will then continue shipping parts. Be very careful. That email may be completely irrelevant depending on the other terms of the party's agreement. The supplier may have accepted everything in that PO regardless of that email. Remember, if you perform, you may be bound by the PO, typos and all. And what can be changed through this process of issuing new POs? Everything. New POs can change your price, specifications, quality standards, volumes, and essentially anything else. You want to have someone within your company who is reviewing purchasing documents as they come in and ensuring that the other party isn't trying to change something that you don't want changed. And we've helped many manufacturers set up internal procedures that have directly benefited their bottom line. And if you don't believe me, I'll give you one example. So this is something I like to call the $400,000 sentence. We were representing a supplier, and the customer wanted a very expensive engineering change. The supplier asked for a price increase, and the customer says sure. The customer issues a PO, but that PO states that the customer is paying, quote, under duress, unquote. What does that mean? That means that the customer can try to claw back that price increase later on. And by the way, that price increase equated to about $400,000 over the course of the contract. So the supplier gets the PO, they tells me they just received it, they call me up, and they tell me about this language, and I said, stop. Don't ship another widget. Ask the customer to reissue the PO, and ask them to add a single sentence in that PO. And this is the sentence that should be in there. This price will remain fixed unless and until all parties agree in writing to any change. So the supplier does that, and the customer agrees. They don't show it to their attorney first. And what do you know? A couple of years later, the customer tries to claw back that price increase, and now they can't because of that single sentence we added. And let me be clear, that was a 5-minute phone call I had with the supplier telling them to request that sentence, and it was worth $400,000. That's the point of today's webinar. When you have the right purchasing process in place, it can add real dollars directly to your bottom line. That's what we do, and it's incredibly rewarding. If you have any questions, you'd just like to chat about an issue you're facing, don't hesitate to contact me. My information is on the screen here, and thank you very much for taking the time to join me today on this webinar. We wish you the very best success. Thank you.